I had a couple comments about people wanting me to go over more basic stuff about like how certain things in your suspension work, and more along the lines of just not just strictly a definition. They explain like how these things work and what they do. The first one I'm going to do is going to be on dampers, otherwise known as shock absorbers. People call them shocks, dampers. There's a few other terms. But essentially what a damper does is, the textbook definition is that it resists the movement of the spring. So your car's sitting on springs, and when you go over a bump, basically the springs compress. And when the springs compress, they're going to want to expand and keep going until they settle. All right, what a damper's job is to do is to resist both movements, is to resist the expansion and the contraction of the spring, and to slow it down and basically kill any of the oscillations. That's the short of it. But dampers, there's a lot more to it than that, obviously, like most things. Okay, dampers in a performance vehicle, or actually I should just say any vehicle, do a lot more than just dampen the spring oscillations. They also have a large impact over not just ride quality, but also body motion of the car. Whether you things like dive, pitch, roll, that's all really important. It can also, dampers can change your understeer, oversteer bias through how stiff they are and whether they allow the car to squat, dive, pitch, roll at certain times, and then also how their influence is based on particular road conditions. Whether or not the curve for the damper is digressive, linear, or progressive. Like there's a lot of different stuff. So I'm just going to kind of break down a couple of things that people have, that I've talked to that seemingly are a little confused by. There are terms that get thrown around with like coilovers and other aftermarket units when they say it's a monotube damper, and they say that like, oh yeah, you should obviously know that monotubes are the best. I mean, these are monotubes. They're sick, right? What does that mean? Well, monotube just basically means that there's one tube. That's it. You have your shock shaft. This is basically what moves up and down, which at the end of your shock shaft is your piston. Okay, your piston is where you're valving in a monotube damper, and it's pretty much what controls how the damper behaves. And then the monotube is just simply the outer shell. There's one tube, that's it. That's all there is to it. Now, why is a monotube so great or touted? Because the majority of dampers before used to be what was called a twin tube design, which actually a majority of dampers that are still used in OEM applications and trucks and other stuff like that, they're still twin tube designs. What's a twin tube? Twin tube, that's a little hard. I didn't draw this big enough. Okay, I'll just grab the camera then. Okay, a twin tube is exactly that. It's got two tubes. You have your shock shaft, you have your piston, and then you actually also have another sort of piston style valve at the bottom, which we call a foot valve. And then the fluid can actually flow through this foot valve and then around into the second tube. And what this does is a twin tube allows considerable fluid volume for the same size damper. And also the damper can actually have a bit more control because you're able to affect a few more things with the rebound. Pros and cons, monotube. Monotube, you can have a very large piston, which will allow you a very large area of effect as it moves through the fluid, which the fluid, if I didn't already say, is essentially what is creating the damper effect. The damper effect is created by the amount of fluid that flows through the piston. The more fluid that flows through it, the less resistance. The less fluid that flows through it, the more resistance. Now, there's a lot to do with how that fluid goes through and at what shaft speeds, but let's just focus on this right now. So, pros for a monotube damper. Since there is only one tube, you're usually getting a very large piston because the overall diameter of that tube can be bigger. So with a larger piston, you can have finer granular control over the damper going up and down. So that's all to do with the valving. And then the other thing is because since you only have this one tube, this tube can dissipate heat, because as the piston moves up and down through the tube, through the fluid, it can heat the fluid up. And having the fluid be able to cool itself to where it doesn't overheat, it is important. So that's one of the benefits of a monotube. Twin tubes, on the other hand, are cheaper, usually easier to produce because their tolerances are not having to be quite as tight. They typically are not necessarily lighter, but they have a very big advantage. In one respect, is having a foot valve. This foot valve is pretty important because what this can do is in certain applications you can actually use that foot valve to gain more control over rebound and compression. Higher low speed rebound, higher low speed compression. Kind of neat. Certain coilovers like KWs. KWs are famous because they still use twin tube dampers. And now people that'll knock on twin tube dampers, I just simply say, like, look at KWs, dude. They're some of the best dampers that you can buy, period. They're fantastic. And why is that? Well, one part of their design is that they use twin tube dampers. Twin tube's not necessarily a bad thing. It really isn't. It's just there's pros and cons to both. All right? Monotubes kind of have the spotlight, but, you know, they're still good stuff. Now, this I have drawn over here is to try to explain the differences between a couple of terms that people hear that might not understand. Your damping curve, no matter how much money you spend on a set of coilovers, the most important thing for performance in your coilover is the damping curve. It doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside. For the most part, it doesn't matter the brand name. Your shock dyno and your damping curve is going to be almost every single bit for about the way that that car rides, the way car feels, and the way car performs. When you see a set of coilovers that are $800 on eBay, and then you see a set of KWs that are $2,000, and you go, well, what's the difference? They both, you know, there's shocks, there's springs, there's perches. What's the difference? Why is that so much more money? Short answer is damping. The damping curve and how dialed in it is to your application. And also adjustability. What are you able to do with that? Okay, so damping curve. What is that? Well, I've drawn out a shock dyno right here. A typical, you know, sort of generic, what does a shock dyno look like? Shock dyno is real simple. Shock dyno is essentially a plot of how much force versus the speed. So force is up and down on this dyno, on this plot, on this graph. And then you have your shaft speed, low shaft speed, high shaft speed. High force, low force. Well, actually, I said that a little confusing. Okay, the center right here is 0. This is your baseline. This is basic. This is 0 force. As you go up, this is compression. As you go down from the 0, that's rebound. So compression is the resistance for the shock to compress. Pretty easy. Rebound is the resistance for the shock to expand. How much resistance there is. Different for every single different damper and application out there. That's not what we're going over. I just want you to know how to read these, essentially. This area of the graph right here that I have this orange line, dotted line delineating. That is the low section or the low speed section of the graph. Okay, the low speed section. I know it sounds low speed. Oh, okay. Well, why would we care about that? It's actually the most important part of the graph, at least for sports cars, at least for performance vehicles. For driving it's essentially everything for a damper. It's going to tell you how it performs. Because low speed section of the graph is low shock speeds. We're talking about, between 0 and 2 meters a second. Okay? These are very small movements. Now, these small movements are what is roll, pitch, dive. Okay? Those are all included in that low shaft speed section. This is your resistance to those types of body motions, how stiff the dampers are to those types of body motions. Now, there are two different curves that your dampers can really have that you see most commonly. You have the linear curve, which is the red line here, which is essentially goes from 0, and as shaft speed picks up, your resistance picks up in a linear fashion, a straight line. The other line, which is, to me, this is the one to get. This is the one you look out for. This is why you read shock dynographs, is to even just look for this. The green line right here. This is a digressive curve. And as you can see, in the low shaft speed section where we've got the orange dotted lines, it goes up rapidly at a very steep angle, and then it knees off as it goes up higher. Because the high speed section, that's the part where it impacts ride quality. High speed section is the boom, you hit a pothole. Your shaft speeds are going to move really fast. That's going to have all of the problems when it comes to like your ride quality. And basically, if you ever been in a car that just beats you up, like it has coilovers on it and it just seems like it has a vendetta against your spine, most likely it has linear rate coilovers. Linear rate dampers, as the shaft speed goes up, the stiffness goes up. That's all there is to it. You can now, when you have adjustments on it, you can basically adjust how steep this curve is, whether it's more flat or whether it's steeper. That's really all the adjustment does. You're not really moving this line in any other way except for, okay, well, it's either really sucks or it doesn't suck so bad. Digressive rate coilovers, on the other hand, are pretty sweet because they get real stiff right in the area where you want it to be, to resist body roll, to resist suspension movement, to resist dive, squat, all those movements that, are when you're driving a well-handling car. Those are the ones you notice, and turn in, and does the car easily take a set? Does it just hook right into that corner? Does it, does it roll a slight amount, and is it controllable? Or is it like, holy hell, grab on for the handrests? Yeah, so digressive rate coilovers are going to be the largest performance increase over a regular damper that you can get. Now, there's some companies that are like, say, like Fortune Auto. BC makes a set of DR coilovers, which they call digressive rate. That's such a huge thing. Like, yeah, they're $300 more than regular BCs. They are. Same thing with Fortunes. Fortunes are $300 than BCs. But that extra $300 to me is so inconsequential compared to like how much better those coilovers work and how much better those dampers are designed to work. Now, why aren't all coilovers digressive rate? Why? What's the reasoning? Cost. Because the piston and valving design and stack inside the damper is much more difficult to machine. It's much more time intensive, and also just the design. It's difficult to make that work because what happens is, in a digressive coilover, is as the piston hits a high pressure, or a high shaft speed, the valving stack that's in it at low speeds is resisting the movement a lot. But once it hits a certain threshold of how fast this shaft's going to move, the valving inside actually opens up and it lets more fluid go through. And that's why it's difficult, because it's hard to get that design down, and it's hard to actually, because it used to be before Fortunato, because I'm going to say that, before Fortunato 500s, there were no entry-level dampers that you could buy, for the most part, that were digressive rate. The only ones that come to mind that were prior to that were entry level, were Coney Yellows. Coney Yellows. But Coney Yellows off the shelf, their dynagraphs varied wildly. So they were really hard. You had to either take them to a place and have them custom valved and matched together as a set if you wanted really good performance. So Fortune, to me, is a pretty incredible company, because they went through and they're like, okay, well, we're going to make budget high-end coilovers. That's what they did. The Fortune 500s are fantastic because they have a digressive dampening curve that not a lot of other manufacturers did. BC only just recently started making the DRs, which are the digressive rates. And I suspected for so long. I'd never seen a dynograph for BCs, but I always thought, oh, those got to be linear rate. Just like Megan's or K-Sports or any of this other stuff. It used to be you had to spend at least $2,200 to $2,500 to get a good set of digressive rate coilover or digressive rate dampers. Now, $1,350, you can have yourself a set of Fortune 500s. I'm not associated with Fortune in any way. I just think they make a good product. Yeah. Did I leave anything out? Pretty sure this is all I really got on this. I can keep going about different types of dampers and different brands and everything like that for a long time, but then this video will be like 35 minutes long. So, in order for I don't know. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this helped you out a little bit. If it didn't, let me know why. Let me know if you have any other questions about how dampers work and how dampers are designed. There's a lot more stuff going on than just this. But I feel like this gives you kind of a basis to go, okay, well, why are certain things the way they are? Why is a digressive rate better than a linear rate? I can go more into this, but do you want me to? Let me know. All right, that's it for today. Thank you.